So we decided to make a website for our presentation. And so this is like our homepage. So this is, I'll send out a link in the chat too if anybody wants to look at it further, because I did include a lot of information I'm probably not gonna get into really depth on during the presentation, but I'll put a link into the website. So if anybody like wants to look more into it, you guys can jump in and look at it. So this is like our homepage, just kind of giving a brief explanation of what our presentation is about, and what like the website has in it. So we're pretty much going to be discussing a couple different issues around female bodily autonomy and the kind of control over our bodies and our choices, especially we're looking at issues in the US, Egypt, and South Africa. And I chose these ones, one, because the US, I figured that we could all kind of relate and understand a little bit more about it. And then I looked at rates of rape in pretty much all countries. I'll show you guys like a little thing that I was able to find to show you. And I picked a country with the highest percentage and the lowest percentage of rape per capita because I wanted to kind of look and dive into the policies and the way that we report things, because even though these two countries are like at either ends of the spectrum, I think that it really does show the lack of information and reporting that goes into some of the countries with the lower percentages of rape, and how that doesn't mean that they have less of it going on. And so to move on to the next page, oh, hold on. Okay, so this is kind of where I'm going to discuss a little bit about rape in the international spectrum, as well as, again, in these three countries. And so here's a graph, and it's actually, if you go down to where it says like photo credit and you press on that button, it'll actually bring you to a website. Hopefully this will work. Can you guys see it? And you can actually go in and click on each of the separate countries and get the rates, and that's all taken from the UN. And then here I wanted to discuss a little bit about the international law that we've had around rape. So the first ever, I mean, I'm sure most of you guys have heard about it in history class, the Code of Hammurabi, which is like the first ever set of laws that we have recorded, stated that rape was considered pretty much a virgin being penetrated, which is considered property damage against the father, or also the husband if this person was married and it wasn't the husband who had raped them, which I just thought was really interesting to kind of see where this all started, to kind of get a better understanding of why it's been so hard to kind of get real justice for a lot of sex crimes, especially when the definition began as something as a right of property rather than something against bodily autonomy. And then the next set of international kind of permits that we see around this was in the Lieber Codes in 1863, which listed rape as a crime punishable by death, and was later adopted into international law in the 1907 International Peace Conference, because this was originally kind of a statement made by President Lincoln in an international kind of conversation, but again was adopted into law, and then during the Hague Convention, which was in 1907, and this led to the adoption of the Lieber Codes, but they actually altered it and removed the mention of rape, although there was still like some implications that that could be a crime punishable by international law. It wasn't explicitly stated. And then in the Geneva Conventions in 1949 and 1977, the rules and rights outlined did touch on issues of rape, finally kind of prohibiting it in a international sense. And then we see some issues go on in Yugoslavia and Rwanda, where the international community speaks out, stating that it is a crime against humanity. And then in 1998, we see the Statute of the International Criminal Court explicitly state that rape, sexual slavery, enforced prostitution, forced pregnancy, and enforced sterilization, and other forms of sexual violence are prohibited internationally. And then we see in 2005, Rule 93 state that variations of sexual violence are prohibited by international law, both in international and non-international conflicts, stating that even conflicts that are going on domestically can that have to do with rape can be intervened by the international court. And so I'm not going to go in and explicitly like read all of the parts of these. I'm just going to read like the bolded statements, but these are some facts and figures by the United Nations on rape, which I just thought were very like chilling and something that should be like discussed. So globally, an estimated 736 million women, almost 1 in 3, have been subject to intimate partner violence, non-partner sexual violence, or both at least once in their lifetime, which also comes down to 30% of women age 15 and older. Most violence against women is perpetrated by current or former husbands or intimate partners. By September 2020, 52 countries had integrated prevention and response to violence against women and girls into COVID-19 response plans. But more efforts are urgently needed. 137 women are killed by a member of their family every day, which I thought was a really interesting thing, mostly because I think oftentimes we see these issues as coming from outside our circles, and to see that there's this many women being killed by a member of their family every day is just chilling. Fewer than 40% of women who experience violence seek help of any sort. And that's kind of going on to the side of reporting. Like, yes, these are all of the numbers we have from reported incidents, but there are way more incidents that go unreported due to many different things in many different countries. And at least 200 million women and girls aged 15 to 49 have undergone female genital mutilation in only 31 countries where this practice is concentrated, which I just thought was also terrible to even think about. And 15 million adolescent girls worldwide have experienced forced sex. And I also included this in there because we will talk about this a little later in the presentation, that school-related gender-based violence is a major obstacle to universal schooling and the right to education for girls, which again, I just thought was something important to touch upon. And this is just kind of moving on into United States law and looking at a bit of what goes on domestically. 1 in 6 women and 1 in 33 men have been the victim of a rape attempt. Again, this is going by only reported scenarios and not anything that goes on outside of what's being reported. And 1 in 4 girls will be sexually abused before the age of 18, and an estimated 36,000 children are sexually abused every year. And then here, I'm not going to again go into detail about all of this, but if you guys are interested, I urge you to come and take a look. So I started off just talking about the origin of American rape laws. And here we see a really large bias against women, especially in the way that rape has been treated in the law throughout time. It began as, again, a crime against a husband or a father, and a crime against their property, most importantly. But then now we obviously see a push towards kind of changing those laws a little bit to fit this final definition that we have as of 2012, which defines rape as the penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina or anus with any body part or object, or oral penetration by a sex organ of another person without the consent of the victim. Although this is a lot closer to a more idealistic definition of rape, I definitely think it still has a long way to go in making sure that everything can be protected under the law. And then here I also talked a little bit about United States penalties, but because the United States is split up and each state has its own laws regarding this crime, it's hard to kind of just pinpoint what exactly the penalties are. So I have a brief overview here. Let's see. And we also have, I also included some suggestions for moving forward. And this comes from an author who's been studying rape for quite a long time, and especially the effects that it has in American society and how to kind of combat that. And so she talks about, first, we all need a better understanding of what constitutes sexual harassment and assault, so that way we can kind of get a better understanding of it, and make sure that we're protecting everybody and kind of giving everybody the time and space to heal. Second, we have to remember how common it is, especially knowing that not a lot of them are reported. Third, we have to correct common misconceptions about people who both commit and have to deal with sexual crimes, because there is a lot of I guess, stereotypes about what a perpetrator and a victim look like, and that is definitely very detrimental to the healing process. And last, we really need to make sure that we're supporting everybody in the way that they need to be supported. And again, if you guys do decide to come and look at this website, you can press on any of these buttons and it'll actually bring you directly to the websites where we got this information. And they do have a lot of other really interesting, eye-opening information as well. And so next we went into South Africa and talked about the definition of rape there, which is currently the intentional or unlawful sexual intercourse with a woman without her consent. Sexual intercourse includes the penetration of the labia major. Girls under the age of 12 cannot legally consent to sexual intercourse. And so what I thought was really interesting about this was the fact that it's so clearly stated woman. Obviously it's very clear that men can also be raped or have sexual violence committed against them. But I don't know, I just thought it was very interesting that they so solely singled out women in this law. And then I discussed here the current facts and figures that they have, as well as some of the barriers of reporting cases, which I thought was interesting as well, as because there's often difficulties with physical access, fear of examination, fear of being blamed, fear of retaliation by the perpetrator, fear of the legal process, including experiencing rudeness and poor treatment. And many women are concerned that if they seek care after sexual assault, their reputations will be ruined because health workers and facilities do not respect confidentiality. So, in the US, we're so used to laws like HIPAA that kind of protect us to a point at least. But seeing here, in a country where this could ruin your reputation, and knowing that people who are supposed to be there to help you aren't, is definitely one thing that would turn many survivors off from reporting, and again leads to the figures that we have that are clearly inaccurate. And this also discusses a little bit about how the new set of laws that were introduced in 2007 in South Africa actually make it so police don't have to explicitly state on reports what kind of sexual violence the survivor went through. So when we're looking at reports from 2007 on for South Africa, we're not getting reports of the amount of rape or sexual assault or domestic violence. We're getting a rape of over 59 sexual offenses that could be considered under this act. So we really have a very unclear numbers here. And this is, again, some of the penalties around rape and sexual assaults in South Africa, and some suggestions for moving forward, which includes improving the quality and type of statistics, well-designed community-based surveys to kind of help with efforts to address sexual violence and see what people need most. And again, also making sure that people are separated from their perpetrators and are protected long after they have gone through what they've gone through. And then moving on to Egypt, we see the definition of rape here is defined as the complete sexual intercourse with a female without her free consent, which again here, like looking at this definition, you see complete. Many times rape ends before it can be completed, whether it's from the struggle of the female or the male just gives up, or however, whatever ends up happening. So this is definitely confining the amount of people who can report or feel that what happened to them is even reportable or could be penalized under law. And so here we also see that the two main legislative instruments for protecting women is the Egyptian Constitution and the Criminal Code, as well as the amendments in the Criminal Code. There appear to be no official statistics for crimes of sexual violence against women because the victims of such violence, from reporting it, fear of retaliation or shame. And I think that this again just really underlines the fact that not only do women are going through these terrible assaults and heinous crimes, but they're also having to deal with some really awful repercussions when they decide to report or if they decide not to. Whether that means staying around the perpetrator or getting murdered by other people around them because they decided to speak out. And again, this is where I also included the penalties. And I thought it was really interesting because there is a death penalty for rape in Egypt under a certain set of circumstances. So whether that is the perpetrator is related to the victim, the perpetrator is one of the victim's guardians, the perpetrator works as domestic servant for the victim, or the rape is perpetrated by 2 or more persons. I thought this was really interesting because there was a really famous case that came up, I believe a year or 2 ago, about a gang rape of a young woman in a bus in Egypt, and all of the perpetrators went free. And I thought this was interesting, again, like I said, because under this code, they should have actually been put to death for their crimes. And again, these are just a few suggestions moving forward, that amending the criminal code to remove or change provisions that discriminate against women, including, changing that definition of rape, adding new provisions to the criminal code that focus on the victim's right to privacy and appropriate access to assistance, and improving the criminal justice system in total to kind of help and make sure that people who do experience these types of violence are able to report and go forward without any worse repercussions.
Thank you. So yeah, Araya really laid out the kind of structure, and I'm gonna dive into more how this applies and how we can see this in both the employment arena and also discrimination of females. So with that being said, I applied this to a study, which you can see in the data down below. So the main focus of the study is to evaluate how the sexual harassment of women in the public and the workplace has continually ostracized single women specifically. The focus is to highlight how unfairly women are being treated and to emphasize how severe these situations continue to incline with time. I want to focus specifically in regards to retail, where according to the article, Making Retail Jobs Good for Women, the raise is particularly welcome news for women who make up 49% of retail industry's 16.6 million workers, but 55% of its low-wage workers. However, the industry needs to do more to ensure that retail jobs are good jobs, particularly for women, on whom its unfair and unpredictable scheduling practices fall. So I just wanted to consider that statistic. 49% of women work in retail. With that being said, there's 49% of the population being threatened for unwanted attention, such as rape or just sexual harassment jokes, such like that. So if you look down at table 3, which is there, you can see that women see fit that the only option to deal with their workplace harassment is to leave their own workplace. And that, referring back to the statistic, was 49% of an entire population. That is not acceptable, and women should not have to leave their own jobs, not to mention that a majority of these women in retail are paid minimum wage to not only support themselves, but also have families to consider as well. So we can see here how severe the harassment is from 1993 on the left side of the column to 2003 on the right side of the column. The increase in females who actually had to quit their job because the harassment was so severe. So it went from 7.2% to 12.3%. Which is really saddening, because the fact that this harassment was so severe and continues to incline is just really upsetting, that people felt the only option was to quit. And then if you scroll down a bit, we can see in table 1, the data displays how serious offending female autonomy truly is. So in specificity, we can look at the category of sexual imposition. It is evident that the harassment and sexual jokes in the retail workplace has continued to increase and become more monumental. Under the category sexual imposition, one can see that rape had increased an entire percentage from 1993 being 0 to 2003 being 1. And that's just within a matter of 10 years. So I just want to emphasize that, because those numbers are simply not okay. And it's something that we need to have on our radars. So we must learn from these actions. According to Reina Gattuso, she says, we can not ever truly prevent sexual violence and harassment because it's not our fault. It's the choice of the aggressor and of a sexist society. Even so, the burden of assessing our own risk constantly falls on women's heads. And we learn strategies to make ourselves feel more comfortable in the hopes of getting through the day in peace. When in public space, some of these strategies may be wearing headphones to prevent male strangers from talking to us, wearing sunglasses so men can't see our eyes or facial expressions, changing our walk routes to avoid harassment, changing the way we dress, and arranging our facial expressions to look hostile. So again, I just want to reflect that we should not be changing our bodies, the way we dress, or facial expressions in any way, shape, or form. And just to reflect on what Reina is truly saying, that we shouldn't be changing ourselves because of our aggressors that are truly impacting our lives. We should be educating our aggressors to make those numbers decrease instead of increase when it comes to rape. So in figure, and then discrimination in the workplace. So in figure 1, we have a lot of visuals here. The first figure displays how women primarily surveyed that it takes much longer for females to get a raise or promotion than most males primarily do. This is motivated by the fact that these women feel more inclined to prove themselves because society has ingrained the idea that us females live in a men's world. And as a result, it is only valid that we have to prove our efficacy in the workplace in essentially every part of our lives. In figure 2, it takes a lot more convincing and hard work for women to receive a promotion in contrast to men. We can see this is in a modern day example displayed in the article from The Guardian, which states Cassandra, who is 52 from San Francisco. Her husband and herself both graduated the same school, got the same exact worked at the same exact company, and she was even hired a few weeks before he was. But in her husband's final interview, he mentioned that he was being paid $33,000, or his wife, was being paid $33,000. So his company bumped her husband's pay up to $36,000, so he would be earning more than his wife was. She started the company at the same time and for the salary as a new male graduate, but the company advised him to start a day before his wife, so he would always have seniority over her. So again, just that idea of males being superior over females and how that reflects society and how women are treated. And in figure 4, in relation to figure 1, explaining that females feel always compelled to prove themselves. We're not really good enough no matter what we do. And this is the result in doing so. And in figures 5 and 6, they go hand in hand greatly. So women feel that in order to improve their salary and standings, it is important to receive validity from their male superiors, which a majority agreed and felt that was a common atmosphere in their work environment and workplace. This is really frustrating because the idea that men are superior is like really a reoccurring one, and we need to change this stigma altogether in society. In figure 7, females agreed and voted that they were less motivated by their employers in the workplace, meaning that there's a sense of favoritism and bias, which can lead to a very uncomfortable and marginalizing work environment. So this just highlights the idea that no matter how hard females work to try and prove themselves, we all know they're just as smart and just as capable as men, but that feeling that you're not good enough for your workplace may even force women to leave their job as a result and seek another maybe lower paying job or altogether just a more inviting company. Figure 8. Simply the idea that men are too comfortable around women and that new boundaries need to be established in the professional environment. It is 2021, and yet we are seeing an increase in such issues, which is so disappointing. And we need to be moving forward, not moving backward. So we should see those numbers of sexual harassment percentage decrease, not increase. Um, Figure 9, the idea that women are not as capable as men are in general, that being physical or mental, and females in the poll agreed that this is a common theme in their surroundings. So just kind of that stigma and idea that women are just as good enough as men, and that we need to diminish this idea that men are better than females for whatever reason that may be. And figure 10, which I found to be the most interesting. More flirtatious and scandalous women who dressed differently in their workplace found to be more successful, gaining attention and being listened to by others. So, what does this really say? It says that if you dress a little bit more scandalous in the workplace, you'll get more of that male attention that you deserve. Now, is this right? No. And this should not be the way things roll. So I'm hoping that that number decreases, because we should not be dressing or changing ourselves a certain way to reflect our capabilities in a workplace, for that matter. Table 3. This reflects what was discussed in the figure that was further broken down and analyzed before, which applies to the United States now. One may believe, accordingly to stereotypes, that females in South Africa face harsher discrimination, but the truth of the matter is that females of the United States do too. And it is something that is overlooked and never truly acknowledged or questioned in our society. Therefore, I cannot emphasize enough that we acknowledge the harassment that women face and try and put an end to this before it escalates out of hand. And then, and a feminist analysis on the international rights law. So we can see here how this reflects to class in Binion's article, where her argument directly correlates with the previous data given before about female discrimination in workplace. We can see this in the traditional limitations that a civil rights model poses. Another example is political prisoners. We mainly look to the state, where they should be upholding and punishing those who violate others' rights, but no one really considers the private actors, such as private businesses and the workplace, where sexual assault and discrimination of females is a serious and prevalent issue today. So I just wanted to point out some quotes that really resonated with our project. So, sorry. On page 516 of Binion's article, she states, John Locke sought to deny the legitimacy of the divine rights of kings without challenging patriarchal familial structure. The common factor that family and state are two separate spheres. Therefore, it is important that women's autonomy are being respected in a private, non-governmental form as well. And then on page 519, the private person, like the familial milieu, I'm so sorry if I pronounced that wrong, is outside the purview of human rights law, is regularly challenged within feminist jurisprudence. Further meaning that the government has an obligation to do what they can in their utmost power. She also exploits the fact that non-state abusers are guilty and accountable for violating human rights. So what does this mean, like further broken down? It displays that the power of employers, corporate policymakers, etc., which object and push more toward a modern legislation, it's up to them, and it's also in their power to make sure, as I discussed in the statistics before, that females aren't being discriminated against. They don't have to change the way they look in order to get that attention and the respect that they deserve. So I think that correlated very well with the data shown.